It's about history, policy, and impact. A new perspective on current affairs, bringing experience, insight, civility, and scholarship to the urgent issues of today. It's about our past, present, and future. Your host, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, Douglas Blackman. From the University of Virginia's Miller Center, this is American Forum.
Welcome back to the Miller Center's American Forum. Today we continue a special series of programs called Aftermath of the Endless War. As more and more of the men and women who fought and held commands or set policy for Afghanistan and Iraq return to their homes, move on with their lives, America is becoming more introspective about the consequences of U.S. strategy since the 9/11 attacks, not unlike the slow reconsideration of Vietnam that began more than a decade after the end of that conflict. A flood of books, memoirs, and films is beginning with themes that probe this shared experience. Some of them heroic, some of them more complicated. We decided to organize a series of episodes in which we'll hear from high-level strategists like our guest in the next hour, diplomats, commanders and soldiers who were on the ground during the fighting, experts on Islamic fundamentalism and terrorism, suicide in the military, and others. We hope this will become an extended dialogue that begins to unpack the consequences for Americans on many levels of this long and conflicted chapter in American history. Joining us today is retired four-star General Wesley Clark, who over a long career of military and public service has been on the forefront of both military combat and policy planning, serving as the Director for Strategic Plans and Policy of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff and as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander. General Clark graduated first in his class from the United States Military Academy at West Point and was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University. He was a soldier's general, was wounded in combat in Vietnam, received a Bronze Star, Silver Star, and Purple Heart. He has been an advisor to multiple presidents, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, our nation's highest civilian honor, and was himself a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2004. Wesley Clark is also the author of multiple books on war and global strategy. He joins us today to discuss his most recent, Don't Wait for the Next War, a strategy for American growth and global leadership. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Doug. Pleasure to be with you.
Your book underscores the sense that the United States has arrived at a posture in the world in which the default response to almost every international crisis that comes up is basically the question of whether we should intervene militarily or not. We have this one extraordinary arrow in our quiver, and the question is whether to use that. What's the problem with that particular strategy?
Well, the problem with it is that not every problem is addressable by the use of military force. And that when you use military force, there are a lot of unintended consequences. And it's a lot easier to get into a military action than it is to get out of it. What we learned during the Cold War and through the study of multiple contingency operations and what we put in place and practiced during the late 1990s in our engagement in the Balkans was don't use military power unless you know what the end state is that you're seeking and how you're going to get there, including the political solution. So, for example, when we were there in Kosovo in the late 1990s, we had already negotiated the NATO occupation. We knew what country was going to hold which sector. In fact, we didn't want to fight. We wanted Serbian President Milosevic to accept the plan for the peacekeeping mission. And when he wouldn't accept it, and he tried to use force, then we had to block that use of force and compel him to accept a peacekeeping solution, which we did. But that's the reverse of what was done a few years later in Iraq, where we charged in, used military force, and really had no idea what we were going to do once we'd accomplished the military objective.
Why was it that in the midst of a time when people were not particularly clearer about all of this, why was it then that that particular conflict ended up being handled in the way that it was?
Yeah, it's a very good way to frame the question, Doug, because when the Cold War ended, we really lost the strategy that had animated America since the time of President Eisenhower. There was no Soviet Union to guard against. We didn't have to contain Soviet expansionism. We didn't have to deter a Soviet nuclear attack on the United States or an invasion of Western Europe. And so there was a strategic vacuum, let's say. And into that vacuum, we brought American ideals. The idea that we were the only nation that had, or system that was proven. Marxism-Leninism failed. It didn't motivate human behavior. There was no Asian model, and people wanted to emulate us, including in Europe. And so we had that. And it was a time when America was caught up in an enormous peacetime economic expansion with cell phones and the beginning of the internet craze and the dot-com bubble. And so America had sort of turned inward. Meanwhile, we had these challenges, and we had the instruments of military power left over from the Cold War. And I think the Clinton administration, the political leadership, the political people at the top, Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright, Tony Lake, Sandy Berger, Strobe Talbot, these people were quick learners. They saw what happened and they learned from it. So they tried to bring peace to Bosnia early on. They tried to negotiate. It didn't work the first time in '94. In '95, we got it right. We had to apply force, but we applied force to produce diplomacy. I remember walking in the fall of '95 around a lake in Belgrade with Richard Holbrooke and Milosevic, and we were bombing at that time a couple of days, and Milosevic said to us, he said, "General Clark, you must stop this bombing. It's very bad for peace." Well, it's exactly the reaction we'd hoped for. We put him under pressure, that he had to come to us diplomatically to escape the military consequences. But we learned a lesson, and that was a lesson we applied later in Kosovo.
Another part of that story that is often not talked about as much is that just before those events, there in 1995, the Croatian army finally resurrects itself and mounts this big offensive, the biggest land movement of troops in Europe since World War II. 100,000 Croatian soldiers go on the offensive, officially against the wisdom of the United States, and to the surprise of most of the world, they do very well. And they're actually the ones who drive the Serbs out of Croatian territory and much of Bosnia. Now, as I always understood it, that part of that was because the CIA was providing them with information about where all the Serb artillery positions were, and that actually there was a deeper level of engagement by American military intelligence contractors. But in the end, it is a story in which there's a combination of arming indigenous military that we're hoping will do better in a certain situation, and then providing another layer of power beyond that, which is not unlike some of the strategic dialogue that's going on in parts of the world today.
That's right. I mean, I'm not sure how much actually was done by the CIA in this case. There was a more or less innocent training program run by the U.S. generals. It was blessed by the State Department that taught the Croatian military, which never had a military before. It says, here's the way you give an order, tell about the situation, say what the mission is, have a concept,
right.
Make sure you got logistics and communications covered on it. And they practiced that. How it got applied to the battlefield was remarkable.
And this was a time, it's important to remember that when we think about the horrors that we have seen in international affairs over even just the last few months, but it is important to remember what was actually happening in Bosnia and Srebrenica. The famous collapse of Srebrenica in 1995 led to the rounding up and execution of 8,000 Muslim men and boys over a weekend.
And let me just make this very, very clear, because this is what we're talking about, something very important that has immediate relevance. The United States and NATO would never, ever have gone into that part of Europe if there hadn't been conflict, if there hadn't been refugees, if there hadn't been murder and mayhem spilling over into the rest of Europe. We had no desire whatsoever for any territorial aggrandizement. We didn't want to, it wasn't aimed at Russia, it wasn't anti-Russian, it was simply a response to 2 million refugees pouring into the rest of Europe. Reports of maybe 200,000 killed, brutal murders, torture of children, bombing of civilians, and it was slaughter. Pictures of these emaciated prisoners and on the cover of Newsweek in 1992, sort of captured opinion momentarily during the presidential campaign, but it went on and on and on.
Let's back up a little bit now, because I think that there's a lot in your book that addresses exactly these kinds of considerations and obviously lessons that you learned from that time and have expanded on since then. You also thread some pretty interesting needles, I think, in the course of the book. Like, for instance, you start off with a sort of a big history lesson about how America emerged from a little bitty country in the wilderness into a great superpower. And you simultaneously talk about your view, and I think you say the view of most Americans, that a government that governs least is probably governs best, sort of a small government idea. But in the end, you also ascribe much of the success of the United States to a very aggressive kind of government engagement.
That's right.
And then later in the book, when you talk about strategic considerations, you were suggesting a similar sort of thing for how we engage with the rest of the world. Now, some people would look at that and say that sounds like nation building or some of the other kinds of terminology that fell out of favor not that long ago and came to be viewed as bad things, entanglements for us to get involved in. But talk us through your thinking about those issues and the extension of government power other than military and the balancing act that I think you're trying to describe.
So today, in the post-Cold War world, what we have to understand is the basis for American power is not how many ships, how many divisions, how many strategic bombers, how many ICBMs. It's really the strength of the American economy. Other people want to live like we want to live. And we've got a wonderfully strong economy. But for the last 10 to 15 years, 20 years, we've not quite had the right economic engine to pull that economy forward. Rate of small business formation in the United States has been cut in half from the 1960s and 70s. There's a sort of iron law in economics that little companies get sold to bigger companies and bigger companies get sold to even bigger companies, and eventually there's only 3 or 4 big companies left. And if you look at the cable industry, the cell phone industry, the oil industry, the automobile industry, they all follow the same. The banking industry is moving in this direction. We're doing away with small town banks in America step by step by step as technology enables us to do it. And it's what's happening in America, and the question is, then what's the growth engine for America? How do we get the power we need? We have challenges out there today, unlike 15, 20 years ago when the Chinese economy was less than $1 trillion. Now the Chinese economy is the second largest in the world. Some people say it's going to be larger than ours in 2 or 3 years, maybe larger now in terms of purchasing power parity. And they're putting money into military. And they have aims. The Soviet-Russian economy is small right now, but Russia wants its land back. It considers Eastern Europe its land. I've been told this many times, and it's the way the Russians think. It's what Putin says. Ukraine, he says, it's not a real country. He says Kazakhstan's not a real country. He wants these countries back. And so these people are playing geostrategy. And in the United States, we're playing something else that we don't quite understand. We can only be on this playing field with our economic strength. So we need to grow this economy. That's the point. Grow the American economy.
And so your macro proposition is that this robust American economy that engages with the world in constructive ways is ultimately a superior influence over the world. But I wonder, though, at the same time, which I don't think anybody would disagree with that, and you've got a more specific plan that you outlined than just that. But what do we say about the Ukraine? I mean, there we are, where a large part of the Ukraine is in fact Russian-speaking. It's the birthplace of the Russian Orthodox Church centuries ago. I mean, it has a rich Russian heritage, rich culture. We decided a long time ago in North America that people who looked a particular way and generally shared a certain set of religious beliefs were going to take over everything and displace the people who didn't look that way or share those views. In the end, why isn't that, and I think Vladimir Putin would say, you grabbed what you thought was naturally yours, you invade countries without a sound basis. How is it then at this stage of the game that we can say to Vladimir Putin that that's not a legitimate thing for you to do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot in that question. Let me see if I can.
I specialize in those kinds of questions. Lots of things in them.
Take it step by step.
Okay.
So first of all, in the economic sense, America's power has been the power of the American market. People want to come in, invest in this market, and sell to this market. And it's been also America's technology and America's educational system. That's been the animating force of the post-Cold War world. What's at risk is whether we can keep the structure of this together. We believe it's been beneficial. We've lifted billions of people out of poverty. We provide unprecedented living standards. We've got some challenges with climate change we can talk about. But essentially, we've brought the world much further in terms of nutrition, health, safety, reduction of war than anyone would have ever imagined in 1945 or 50. So, but now we see pressure and crumbling at the margins of this. If we're going to retain it, we need America's economic strength. Yes, it's true, Vladimir Putin would say these things, but his having said them doesn't necessarily make them true. So as I said before, we did not go into Eastern Europe for self-aggrandizement. We went there because if we didn't do something to stabilize it, we were having, in the continent of Europe, crimes against humanity and genocide going on, and producing refugee flows and costing billions and billions of dollars. Germany was spending $20 billion a year just on refugees in Germany. So we acted to stabilize the situation as well as to address humanitarian grievances. In Eastern Europe, really, Ukraine has always been a separate country. And if you talk to the Ukrainians, they will tell you that it was Kiev, which is the father of Moscow. It wasn't that Moscow came down to Kiev and said, hey, you guys need to see our religion down here. It started in Kiev and it spread northeast toward Moscow. Kiev is the older civilization. And Kiev was taken by the leaders of Muscovy during and given back and fought over, and there were Turks and there were Huns and there were Tatars and there were finally Russians. But there is a Ukrainian civilization. And the Ukrainians will tell you today that what happened when in 1917-18 is Ukraine again asserted its independence. It was subjugated by the communists. And not only that, but under Nikita Khrushchev's leadership, collectivization of agriculture took place, and some 10 million Ukrainians were starved in the 1930s, deliberately, by the confiscation of food. If you were caught with the food, you were shot. If you buried the food, you could live on it for a year, but you couldn't bury enough food to live for 3 years. And the Russians, the Soviets, then brought in new people to take over that land, who, when they plowed the land, as the Ukrainians describe it to me, they turned over clothes and bodies and belt buckles and things from the 10 million in the so-called Holodomor who had been starved. And so even the Soviet Union sought a separate UN position for Ukraine. So at the end, when the Soviet Union was trying to figure out what to do, there was Belarus, White Russia, there was Ukraine, and there was Russia. And they decided there was no central union. They basically broke it up, and Ukraine became an independent country. It was pledged under the Bucharest Declaration in 1994, signed by President Yeltsin of Russia, that both the United States and Russia would respect Ukraine's boundaries, and Ukraine would give up its residual nuclear force, which had left over from the Soviet Union. All that was done. And so it's a little surprising that Putin now can come back and say, not a real country. No, he's breaking international law, he's breaking an agreement. But what's at stake here is much more fundamental than that. This is the structure of safety of Europe and the rest of the world. It's whether international law is going to be upheld. It's whether nations have the right to choose their own government or not. It's whether you can have free enterprise without state-enforced corruption, which is what's going on in Russia. And it's the security structure that we put in place in Europe. At the end of the Cold War, these former satellite nations of the Soviet Union, they demanded to be in NATO. I remember going to Romania in 1998, early 98, and the Minister of Defense of Romania said he wants to be in NATO. I said, why? Is it something to do with the Russians? Or, I mean, we were saying, and the NATO expansion wasn't directed against Russia. He said, of course it has to do with the Russians. It's like the foreign minister of Bulgaria told me in 1997. She said, Bulgaria must be in NATO. She said, today Russia's weak, but someday Russia will be strong again. And they'll be back here, and they'll be trying to dominate us and take our resources and tell us what to do, and we won't have any independence. And so that's why they became members of NATO. It was reluctant on the part of the West. We actually didn't seek it. They sought us and demanded those protections. And so we responded because we attempted to stabilize. We believe that was in Russia's interest to have stability. Can't be in anybody's interest to have war on your borders. But what Putin has decided to do is to protect his own regime. He's decided to go after Ukraine. He couldn't tolerate the thought of a democratic Ukraine that wasn't under Russian control. The NATO is a subterfuge. He knows NATO is not any threat to Russia. But it's a good thing to say because it puts the NATO people on the defense. Oh, no, we didn't mean it. What he wants is control of Ukraine.
The old Russian Empire.
Of course, because if he has that, he picks up 45 million people, a modern economy, better geography, better agriculture, and more of a counterweight to what he's really worried about, which is China.
Yeah, the territory that Hitler wanted more than anything else in Russia. But so walk us through then. You outline in the book a handful of sort of guiding strategic principles that sort of your recommendation to Americanism. So quickly walk us through those. Hit each one of them and tell us the Wesley Clark program to avoid the quagmire that we've seen in the conflicts of the past.
Doc, what I'm saying is you have to look at the long-term challenges and separate those from the crises. Ukraine is a crisis. The long-term challenges for America are dealing with terrorism, handling the cyber threats, making sure the financial system is stable, bringing China into the world community in a way that's synergistic and harmonistic to the existing community, not as an adversary, and dealing with climate change. These are challenges that will extend beyond the incumbency of any congressman, senator, or president. They'll take years. Together, they all share some common characteristics because they all require public and private work. They all have to be done in conjunction with allies and other people around the world. You can't just build a fence around America and deal with these problems. You can't just have government do it, but you can't just turn it over to the private sector. And they all take money. So you've got to have the resources. And if you're in a cash-starved situation and you don't believe the government can help you, then you can't deal with any of these problems effectively. And the end result will be the reduction of America's power and influence in the world, an increase in geostrategic risk, and the growing incapacity of the United States to influence events abroad, which will eventually have very adverse impacts on the welfare of ordinary Americans. And so my prescription is get the economy moving. Now, how would you do it and how would you pull things back together? I like energy. I think we've got a unique opportunity. For 40 years, we've been buying foreign oil. We've been subsidizing Saudi Arabia to the extent of hundreds of billions of dollars a year of military deployments. We've fought wars over oil to try to provide. Now, we don't have to do that the same anymore. We can actually become energy independent. It's a market function, but if you keep the price of oil high, and the Saudis kept it high for us, and it turned out that we had plenty of oil if you had the right technology, and there was a window of time, and we got that technology in shale. And about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a slight imbalance in the market, and I can't prove this, but my suspicion is that someone woke up on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean and said, you know what? These Americans, if they're really serious about energy independence, they won't need us. And if they don't need us, who is going to protect us? Because since the 1930s, we've had an arrangement with the Saudis that said, we'll protect you if you guarantee we can get oil when we need it. And that's been a pretty good arrangement for them. They've been able to take in trillions of petrodollars. They've been able to recycle that, and there's a couple of $1 trillion invested in our economy. They're doing some of their own economic development, but hundreds of billions of dollars has been recycled into fundamentalist, extremist Islam, the Wahhabi sect. And they've established mosques all over the world. I had people tell me in Kosovo, they said, No, but we told them we don't want the mosque, but they put it in anyway. Then they bring in kids, they give them food, they bring in the families, they feed them, and then they take the kids off to Saudi Arabia. They come back and they have this interpretation of jihad and so forth. It's very extreme how they teach Sharia law, and then a certain percentage of those people, they go haywire. And so we're feeding that. I have a lot of great friends in Saudi Arabia. I've been there many times, but it's the cycle, the engine. Despite all of our friendship, our long history and relationships, somehow we have to have Saudi leadership to turn this off. But instead, I think what's happened is they looked at this and they said, boy, the price of oil is going down. This might solve our problem. If we could get rid of that U.S. oil production, the world doesn't have to change that much. So they were asking, can we get rid of shale at like $80? If we cut it to $80, they didn't get rid of shale. $70, didn't get rid of shale. $60, didn't get rid of shale. $50, they're still out there. A lot of people are being hurt in the United States by this. I bought gas at $2 last week in Little Rock, Arkansas. Great for the motoring public. But for people associated with the oil industry, it's tough. The question is, can we come out of this, and will the shale industry still give us a chance for energy independence? I think so. And I think if we can achieve energy independence, if we can keep the 100 to 200 to 300, one year we spent $500 billion importing oil. That's money that's just sucked out of the American economy. It's like if every American family wrote a $3,000 or $4,000 check at the end of the year. Here's the IRS money. But then let me give this money to the foreign oil companies. Here's $3,000 from my savings account. You can have this. I won't spend it. And that's what's been happening in America for 40 years, off and on. We have to fix that.
One of the, in terms of reaction to your book, one of the criticisms that's popped up in a few places has been to sort of say that you're trying to have everything at once. That you say we should drill, baby, drill on the one hand, right. But that climate change is really a problem, and that we should also pursue green energy. But you also have kind of a strong message to environmentalists that says, get real. It's not going to work. And so it all makes sense. We don't want to give all this money away to the Saudis. I also am curious your answer to a related question of, how was it that we missed that? That how over this long span of time we're transferring all this money that then is feeding all these things.
It's not just to the Saudis, by the way.
Yeah, but across the board, this whole region of the world. That's sort of a separate question. How did
most of it's not to the Saudis, actually, but the terrorist money, a lot of it is coming from
through the Saudis. And the phenomenon of the Wahhabis, that very much so driven by the Saudis, and that end up biting us.
Okay, so Doug, the answer is that I think you have to. The politics in this country has become very destructive, especially since 2008. It's like Theodore Roosevelt once said, when the average American loses his money, he'll strike out like a wounded snake in any direction and hit at anything, whether it's connected to it or not. And when people lost their life savings value in their homes and lost their jobs and didn't see an economic future, and they looked at the fact that for the American working population, the middle class people, they're not getting wealthier, they're getting poorer. There's still inflation in food cost and energy cost, electricity cost, and so forth. And their wealth wasn't going up. They know there's something wrong. It's not right. And so it gave birth to the Tea Party and a lot of other angry politics, some on the left, mostly on the right. And I think if we can reestablish economic growth, we got a chance to put some of these pieces together. We have to put together the energy and environment piece. Climate change is a real problem, but it's not a real problem tomorrow. What we have to do is have a strategy, a transition. So you have to look like 20, 30 years. You say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to maximize hydrocarbon oil production right now, because honestly, we don't have the electric vehicles we need. And if we had those electric vehicles, we're still producing a lot of electricity from coal, and that's dirty. So while we're getting the rest of that system, people are going to drive on petroleum fuel vehicles all over the world, may as well produce it here. We can do a better job of producing it, cleaner, safer, more environment than anybody else in the world. So we can do that. In the meantime, we know we're going to put a carbon tax in on liquid fuels. So it's $25 a ton, that's like 20 cents a gallon. for the first 2 or 3 years. So you want to buy an SUV, fine. Just understand you're going to, 10 years from now, we're going to move that tax up. It's not going to be 20 cents a gallon. It might be $2 to $3 a gallon. And 30 years from now, you're going to want to drive electric because that tax is going to be much higher. And that escalating tax is an energy policy, a strategy that will drive us away from carbon fuels and into green propulsion. At the same time, we've got wind and solar and green power. And the technology in those is going to take us there.
Should the government be involved in the, almost everybody in America buys their electricity from a private entity that is actually regulated by the government and pays rates that the government actually sets. Why don't we do the same thing with gasoline? Have the government be involved in balancing all these issues that you raise and maintain a consistent price that takes our enemies out of the whole equation?
Could be done. It's just a matter of political will and how you get there.
Now, wait
but
a
I
minute.
think what you
every
have to
politician
do
in
is
America today is supposed to say that's a terrible idea and that sounds like communism and socialism. Why didn't you say that?
What I'm saying is that you have to be practical on this. So I think it is practical that you can get the environmental movement to understand the importance of American energy independence for national power. Because if America doesn't have national power in its economy, we're not going to be able to lead the global environmental movement the way we want to. So understand that it's about America first. And then I think you can go to the energy companies and say, you guys have to understand now, we're going to give you a license to produce more oil off federal lands. We're going to open up some of the seashore. You can do more. We want you to do that. You can also use biofuels, by the way. And then understand now, you have a limited lifespan here. So you take all those big profits you're making, you start rolling, because here's the schedule of taxation and here's the prediction of what it's going to do for demand. And so you're not going to need all that oil in 2045 and 2050. We're going to be doing something else. Now, the U.S. government could take a long-term strategic view. Other governments have strategies. States have strategies. China has long-term strategies. Why can't the United States have a strategy, especially in this? You were asking, how could, for 40 years, we miss this energy independence? We never missed it. Every president has said we need to be energy independent, but every president's failed because what's happened is it's a competitive economic system. And again, we've had price cuts in the cost of petroleum, and when it's cut, government says, hey, God, we invested in that plant up in North Dakota, and it was going to produce fuel out of coal. But you know what? Now oil's only $12 a barrel. Can't produce it, can't compete anymore. So let's kill the plant. We did that. We had that plant that was producing synthetic fuel. We killed it because the price of oil dropped. Of course, the price of oil is not $12 a barrel right now, and that plant, if it were producing synthetic diesel, would be wildly profitable. Governments around the world that control their own resources have long-term strategies. Challenge for America is, can we, in this democracy, have a strategy that the citizens can understand? We had it in the Cold War.
And you're talking about not just energy, but also on a whole range of these strategic considerations. Like, for instance, I would assume there's a pretty broad perception among a lot of thoughtful people that American diplomacy has sort of collapsed in the last 10 or 15 years. That probably overstates it. But in the absence of a broad unifying principle or an enemy to work against with some sort of consensus, that we have this sort of helter-skelter approach to the world that also lacks the same sort of unifying strategy. So you're not just talking about energy, you're talking about a broader kind of national vision.
Yes, but I think it has to, it's true. But it starts with energy because energy is the most immediate way to rebuild the economy quickly. And that's assuming the price of oil stabilizes, which most people say it will, around $70. Then it's fine. You can become energy independent on $70 oil and do quite well and grow this economy and create tens of thousands of jobs for the next 5 to 10 years while you take that economic growth and invest in education and healthcare and other technologies and prepare for the next stage of the energy revolution. Still got to keep your military up. The big picture geostrategically is you need a strong America. You need to hold your alliances together in Europe and Asia. You need to help China understand that it's in China's own best interest to join the international community. We welcome China into it, but they have to do their part. You can't be in that international community and say, no, we don't care if Assad kills people with chemical weapons. That's a long way from China. We don't care if there's human rights violations in Sudan and Darfur. That's too far from China. No. If you're China and you want to be accepted as a leader in the global community, then accept your full measure of global responsibilities. That's what I mean by that. And at the same time, we want to encourage in China the freedom of expression, because we think that ultimately, to have a harmonious world, it has to be attained through people who can exchange views in freedom, not under repression. And so that's a big picture strategy. It's to maintain stability, economic growth, help China come forward and join in the rest of the world, and celebrate mankind. Let's go to the moon and Mars and things like this and have some big dreams out there. But we have to get there, and the engine for getting there is American economic growth.
Let's talk a little bit about this more discrete topic, though it's vast, of the aftermath of Iraq and Afghanistan and this process we're working through. I think you're uniquely qualified to hear from about this, because you were an officer in Vietnam. You were injured, fairly heroic story of how you were shot in battle and then stuck with it and led your command on to achieve the objective that was supposed to happen. You've been acclaimed for that. And then you have this storied career in the military and positions of great leadership, but you're also just an American observing through that whole period of how the country reckoned with Vietnam. You'd experienced it, then the kind of slow reckoning. Now I think we're having a faster velocity of coming around to sorting out some of the lingering issues that we're going to have from Iraq and Afghanistan. It's such a different nature of particularly the soldiers who were involved, the smaller group and who volunteered to be there but still come back with many of the same sorts of issues that take a little while to manifest themselves. And it has also confused a lot of American discourse. We have these different views about it. But how do you feel about where we are right now, and in particular how America views our soldiers and veterans, and whether we're doing the right things for them and the role that they're going to play in society in the decade to come?
Well, I think that after 9/11, we had one of these aha moments in America where we came together on a strategy, and it was the wrong strategy. I remember seeing President Bush at the World Trade Center and the address to Congress, and congressmen singing on America on the steps of the Capitol, and it was an incredible magic moment. We passed the bill that created Homeland Security and gave intrusion into our. I mean, everything came together. No one wanted to be against it, and yet the sentiment was, let's go get Saddam Hussein. He must have been behind this. Turns out he wasn't. Condi Rice and others had said, well, you've got to attack preemptively before he can create the weapons that he might use. But it was a misunderstanding, and it was a misunderstanding of the dynamics of that part of the world. So we got involved in that part of the world by mistake. It was a strategic error. I give a lot of credit to the men and women in the armed forces. Some of the men at the top knew it. They took their orders from the commander-in-chief. They did it. They did it to the best of their ability. In the middle ranks and at the bottom, we had incredible courage, incredible determination, incredible sacrifice by not only the men and women in uniform, but their families, to go there again and again and again and have their lives horribly disrupted and in some cases wrecked as volunteers in service to a nation that had embarked on a course that was a strategic mistake. We had to go after Osama bin Laden. We waited maybe too long to do it. We had to do that. We were in Afghanistan and we took down the government. Somehow that led into a peacekeeping mission, and lo and behold, there we were. You cannot build someone else's nation for them, especially not in the Islamic world, because you're an infidel. So we got into Iraq without a plan of what to do once we got to Baghdad. We didn't even ask for a surrender document. We never had any legal authority from the Iraqis to be there. Even in World War II, after we dropped atomic bombs on Japan, MacArthur had the Japanese come out and sign a document that gave us authority. For some reason, we thought we could just occupy Iraq and didn't need any authority. We disbanded their army, which was that was the real authority in the country anyway. And so we created havoc in the Middle East. Now we're trying to stabilize it. But we're not going to go back in there, I hope, and we're not going to be able to stabilize it. It was in a precarious balance before we shattered it. This is a 300-year-old problem for Islam. If you were living the way Allah told you to live, and He promised you that you were the chosen people, and that if you followed His precepts, He showed that you could conquer the world, as they did in the first century after the birth of Muhammad, then how come 300 years ago those infidels and barbarians came from Europe and they had technology, money, organization, skills, and they bought Islam from Southeast Asia through India and Pakistan across through the Middle East? Suddenly the barbarians, the infidels, not God's people, were in charge. What does this say to us? And that's the problem Islam has been grappling with for 300 years. And one school is that if you just go back and live like Muhammad did, everything will be okay. God will take care of you. That's like the Wahhabi school. That's like ISIS. That's barbaric, as we say it today, but that's the response. We're not going to solve that by dropping bombs. So we've got to work it around the edges. We will probably use military force again and again over the next 20 or 30 years. Think of it like the 30 Years' War in the 17th century Europe between Catholics and Protestants. Or think of it like the French Revolution.
What if we let them sort it out? Particularly as our growing energy independence comes up, and let them decide where these European created borders should or should not be.
There's lots of fear that we might do that because, like the Saudis have depended on us. If we walked away, they've got to find somebody. They're outnumbered by the Iranians. And in their most productive oil-producing province, the majority of the people are Shia. So they need the United States really bad. But we're not going to walk away because what happens there is important to the rest of the world. But on the other hand, we can't solve it by putting young American men and women in. Now you ask, are we taking care of those men and women well? I think the leadership in the armed forces has been sensational. We never built the volunteer force to fight a prolonged war. It was there because we might need it to react quickly. We had a reserve structure that was fully integrated, and we still, in the 1970s, thought there might be, a draft call-up online for a big war, a long war. And instead we had the same people, the same families,
going back
3, 4, 5 tours, and people getting messed up and injured and so forth. Casualty rates weren't that high compared to, let's say, Korea or World War II or even Vietnam, but the mental anguish was enormous. So we owe these men and women a long-term obligation, and we need a way to bring them back into society. In some states, veterans employment's okay. In some states, it isn't. And health care for several 100,000 vets is a problem, and we need to resource it adequately. We need a functioning, effective, efficient Veterans Administration that's fully resourced. And so, no, we haven't done enough, but we owe these men and women in our armed forces a tremendous debt of gratitude. They did what the country asked them to do.
And beyond that sort of sentiment of loyalty to them and a desire to recognize their sacrifice, but there's some more abstract issues too. I mean, Andrew Basovich, who fought in Vietnam, was a lieutenant there, and who had a second lieutenant son who was killed in Iraq, and has written a lot about. Pretty conservative guy, but who has written a lot about his view and criticism of what he calls the new American militarism. But he also talks some about a kind of hollow sense around that began to set in when American citizens would applaud sometimes when soldiers got on a plane, and there may be a fair number of servicemen and women began to feel that was a sort of artificial thing by people who didn't really understand what they had been through. Those are echoes that begin to remind me of some of the sense of disaffection around vets of Vietnam era. But is there a problem there? So what's the jeopardy that comes with an increasingly isolated volunteer military and a growing private military structure that is more and more crucial to the strategic power of these kinds of operations?
Well, I think you want a country whose strength is built on freedom and democracy, transparency, economic growth, rather than a country that's built on a strong military. Now, when we started, we always had a militia, and we fought on the frontier, and people had to take care of themselves and so forth. So there's always been a little of that in the American tradition. But a little can go a long way. And so I'd like to see us have a country in which everybody participates in public service and feels bonded to the country. People who don't participate in it, I see a lot of guilt in this clapping, you know, and I hear a lot of regrets, and even from people my age who didn't go to Vietnam, sometimes it's like, yeah, I should have gone. I got married early, and I had a job in a critical industry, and I couldn't go, and they have regrets. And if you could persuade people to take risks as young people, to do public service, risks to their, it's like one woman told me she said, oh, General Clark, you've done so much. I said, well, if you want to come to the Army, you can do this. She said, I could never give up my freedom. Well, you know, that's okay. I mean, that's what it is. And yet, millions of Americans have given up their freedom, and that's what's made this country. So I'd like to see us get back to public service. And I think where Andrew Bosovich talks about that, I think he's on solid ground. We need to bring the people who serve in uniform together with the rest of the country. They need to be part of us, and they need to come back and know that they served over there and they're reintegrated into the American community. They're not some separate species out there who like guns and like to kill, and then there's the rest of America. That's really dangerous for the country.
But you appreciate how these cultural considerations come into play. In terms of the military, you were talking before with some pride about that the success of the Kosovo operation had to do with that the objectives of this were not to grab territory, that we were bringing principles of the West, American principles, deploying them in the right kind of way and in ways that harmed only the bad guys for the most part. But now we've gone through this long period of conflict where we clearly have the most extraordinary military that anyone's ever seen in all of human history in terms of its execution. But we have Abu Ghraib. We have also in parts of the story, parts of the world, there are populations who view our use of drones and this kind of remote warfare as kind of dishonorable conduct on the part of fighting men. And so our stature in the world, while we're viewed as so powerful, has also been chipped away at by some of these kinds of things. Is there a way to restore that in terms of the cultural interaction between ours and those parts of the world?
Well, I think we are in the process of restoring it. I think you've got to get the troops out of that region except in the most extreme circumstances. We have to be in Yemen right now. Yemen's a threat. We're looking very carefully at North Africa and parts of North Africa. It's a threat to the United States. Where it's a threat to the United States, we're going to take action. But I think we have to understand that we can't simply banish this problem by committing several 100,000 troops and a few $1 billion or a few $1 trillion over let's just get it over with. It's not going to happen that way. You're going to work this at the margins. You're going to work it diplomatically. You're going to work it economically. You're going to work it militarily. Everything's on the table to keep America safe, to keep the structure of the world safe, and to try to help contain and evolve the problem within the Middle East as they cope with Islam, modernization, and the struggle between Shia, Sunnis, Persians, and the Saudi Arabians.
You talk some in the book about the notion of American supremacy, economic supremacy, military supremacy. That's a word that bothers some people in the world. They're sort of tired of hearing it from America. Is there a different way to say what position the U.S. should play in these kinds of in this kind of a conversation, other than supremacy?
Well, I'm not advocating economic supremacy. I'm advocating that America be strong enough to maintain its leadership role in the world. If you look at Pew opinion polls around the world, and people look at China's economic growth rate of 7.5%, and until this last quarter, America at 2%. People said, well, the future of the world, it must belong to China. China builds the big dams. China's talking about going to the moon. China has these major dreams. The United States is always fussing with budget deficits. It can't do this. It's cutting back on this and that. Can't do education. Can't afford health care. Can't rebuild. We land at LaGuardia Airport. It looks like the third world. We were just in Beijing and it's so fabulous. And why can't America do that? Oh, because America's a declining power. If you're a declining power in people's perception, even though it's not true, then you lose influence. So I'm not advocating any supremacy. We don't need supremacy. What we need is the power to lead. Because I do believe that the values that we've established and worked for in the United States of freedom, self-government, limited government, individual human rights, transparency insofar as possible, those are values that can, when they spread, they can create a global civilization that provides the optimum opportunities for individuals to realize their potential and to live in peace and harmony and raise their families. And that's what, in my experience, people all over the world want it. That's what I'm in favor of. It's not about supremacy. Now, you have to maintain military strength because if you don't, you can't convince some nations that they might want to take advantage of you. So can't let down your guard. We're not there yet in paradise, but we don't have to have supremacy, and I don't remember using that word. I'm not in favor of that.
President Obama, in his State of the Union speech recently, sounded a lot like you. Said that these things had already happened, it seemed like. He said, we're demonstrating the power of American strength and diplomacy. We're upholding the principle that bigger nations can't bully the small. That's how America leads, not with bluster, but with persistence, steady resolve. From denying safe haven to terrorists who threaten America in Iraq, Syria, American leadership, including our military power, stopping ISIL's advance. He was criticized by a lot of Republicans for a victory lap sort of speech. But what's your assessment of that?
I think it's an accurate statement of the process that we're in, but it's a work in progress, and I hope it comes through. There's lots of risks in this, like there always is, and what I hope is that we could take those statements and from those statements extract a vision, so that if you go to the man in the street, if you went to the man in the street in the 60s or 50s and said, hey, what's America doing out there? He said, we're going to stop communism. They're not coming here. Now, there was a lot of political rah-rah associated with it, but people knew what the purpose of the United States was. If you did it today, if it was like, hey, we're going to stop what? What, terrorism? You're not going to stop it. You're going to contain it and work against it. It's going to be there 30, 40 years from now as you're going through this struggle within Islam. So what is the strategy that if you could get Americans to put it in a sentence or two, that they would say, we have to work together in order to do X. Now, the President's trying to do all of that, but do Americans understand what we're trying to do? And can they accept it? And what are the risks? So let's take Russia. So we've got Russia under economic stress right now. There's no doubt about it. But they're also fighting in Ukraine. And the most recent reports indicate that Russian reinforcements are continuing to be pushed inside Ukraine, and they're actually engaged in direct combat. I was in Ukraine in November, and the Ukrainians told me, said, you Americans, you think you know war. I said, but we've lost over 4,000 people in 6 weeks. That's as many people as you lost in Iraq in more than 6 years. This is intense combat. And you discover that the Russians are using drones to fire big rockets with submunitions that are proscribed by international law, and nobody in the world community is outraged about it. Instead, the press treats it as a sort of he said, she said. What we need is the American people to have a strategy that links what we're doing abroad to what we're doing at home. We've got to grow this economy. And to do that, we've got to use the government the right way. To do that, we've got to move away from what President Reagan taught us to say. That, there's nothing, the most dangerous words in English language, he said, is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. I mean, President Reagan was a wonderful man and he could coin a phrase. but it's been taken so far out of context. It's been so damaging against what we could, how, the government's always worked for us. We put it there. It should do what we want it to do. And it always has in American industry. So why is it now the enemy? Why don't we use it? As you said, take us to an energy future. Build the infrastructure. Eisenhower wasn't afraid to announce the Federal Highway Program, and yet, what's the great dream today? We don't have enough money to fix our air traffic control system on a timely basis. We can't put in high-speed rail. We argue we're too poor. Everything is compacted because we're resource-starved, and yet we have the resources to grow this economy. That's my pitch. Bring a national strategy together, grow the economy, keep America safe, and let's do wonderful things in the future like we did in the past.
It's a great plan. Thanks for being here. The book is Don't Wait for the Next War by General Wesley Clark. It's been great having you. Thank you very much.